in Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Audrey Gale. She's the author of The Human Trial. This book, Audrey, welcome, by the way.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
This book has a little of everything. There's the medical science, there's the academic scheming, which being a former professor, I'm aware of. There's the blue collar family versus the Boston Brahmins. And having been from Boston, I know exactly what you're talking about in that book. And then, of course, there's the little secrets that's going on in that lab. It's interesting that this book is like pulling for. I wanted to root for Archer the whole time to make sure he got through. But I understand that this book, as well as your first one, was a result of events that occurred in your own family. Tell us how your struggle with the medical community resulted in writing this novel.
Okay, that's a great place to start because, as you know, Carole, I have a master's degree in writing. I have an undergraduate degree in business. I'm not exactly medically trained, but life experiences led me to this story, and it would not let me go. I feel like the universe slapped me a couple times before I understood the message, but the first thing that happened to me in terms of this kind of medical approach, which is what the book is really about, is I got very, very ill in my mid-30s, and I had swollen lymph glands all over you could see them down my shins, down my arms. I mean, it was, and I lived in San Francisco at the time. I went to the doctor, and he couldn't figure it out. So he sent me to the cancer specialist, the exotic disease specialist, every kind of specialist he could think of. And nothing they did worked. So I was pretty sure that this was some kind of lymphoma, and I was going to be counting my days.
Wow.
The guy that I worked with at the time said to me, I really want you to come to my acupuncturist. What have you got to lose? That ends up being a recurrent theme in my life. What have you got to lose? So off I went to the acupuncturist in Oakland, California. And the acupuncturist, they were both named Dr. O, which is also kind of funny. But Dr. O, number one, the female, she actually poked me with one of her needles and squeezed to see what was inside those lymph glands. It kind of hurt, but she said, okay, you have infection all over your body. Let's just get rid of it. So she gave me an acupuncture treatment and then sent me next door to Dr. O number 2, her brother, who was an herbalist. And he gave me the nastiest smelling and tasting powder you can imagine, and instructed me to put it in a smoothie multiple times a day with organic vegetables and as much onion and garlic as I could tolerate. And seemed to think the good news was I could have that as many times a day as I wanted to.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, exactly. But honestly,
great.
Carole, I'm telling you, after all those doctors that I had seen for months, overnight, this treatment, this particular way of treating, absolutely started to shrink my limbs. I could watch them. And within days, I was completely back to normal. So I went back to my internist and said, what do you think? I mean, examine me, tell me what you think. And he said, holy cow, what have you done? And when I told him acupuncture, he said, well, I believe there's a place in the world for, he calls it, orthodox medicine, which is really the new kid on the block, but, drugs and radiation and surgery. And there's a place for acupuncture, and that place, he thinks that Western medicine was really more about when your body can no longer fight. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that, but it was an interesting concept. And then not long after that, I actually was transferred down to Los Angeles by the company I worked for. And when I got here, my 13-year-old golden retriever took ill. And she actually had some kind of skin condition. You could see something was wrong, swelling all over her body. And every doctor I took her to said, just put her down. So I finally found a holistic vet, and he gave her all sorts of different kinds of treatments. Some I understood, like chiropractic and acupuncture, but some I didn't. It was vibrational. There was a sound. There was a vibration you could feel. And so I asked him about what he was doing, and he was very generous with his time. He told me about two men who'd worked in the 30s and who had been just opening up the world of the microcosmic world, I guess we would put it, the electromagnetic essence of the universe. It's not just living, it's everything. And so I did research on those guys, and I still was not totally serious about trying to write about this, but my dad was diagnosed. My dad lived in Los Angeles at the time, and he was diagnosed with leukemia. And his diagnosis, of course, they recommended chemotherapy. And he must have taken it at UCLA, because I don't live near UCLA, but not far. And he came to my house after his first and last chemotherapy treatment and said to me, I don't care if I die tomorrow. I am not going to do that again. So it really, really was very upsetting to him, and obviously upsetting to me.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, you wonder how come you say things at times. I said to him, I know, Dad, you haven't asked me what I think you should do, but if you asked me what I think you should do, I think you should go to my vet. And my dad, being a very esoteric thinker, but an engineer as well, he said, okay, what have I got to lose? So again, that theme. And my vet examined him and treated him and gave him a CD, the old CD players of sounds, certain vibrational rates of sounds. Some you couldn't even hear, some were off the spectrum of auditory. Right. But he said, just play this as often as you can, this vibrational approach to healing. So my dad played this thing every waking minute. And after a month or two, he went back to his medical doctors, who were really expecting the very worst because he had refused chemo.
Right.
And they were shocked. They called it the damnedest case of spontaneous remission they had ever seen.
Amazing.
It was amazing. And so now that's the third slap I got from the universe about, okay, there's something we're missing here. Right. And that is the vibrational essence of our universe. And so the scientists that I've been researching, they became the inspiration for this book. They discovered the electromagnetic basis of life and everything else. They went on to discover that each virus that they could examine, and the only reason they could examine it in a way that still most doctors have never even imagined, is because one of the scientists in my novel, he's a physicist, he had invented a specific kind of light microscope that enabled them to look at specimen slides without any treatments. And that even today is rarely, if ever, done, because normal microscopes require the addition of some kind of substance, chemical, to make the specimen more visible. However, those very chemicals have side effects. So in essence, what medical profession, even still today, for a large part, is they're killing the thing they're hoping to study. The most dangerous form of the disease ends up being viral.
Right.
And they couldn't see the viruses, so they sort of killed them by trying to make them better illuminated. And so what these two doctors did, one PhD, one MD, is they discovered that each virus had a unique frequency and a unique vibration, which everything in the universe has, including us. And then they discovered that if you could recreate that exact vibration and just expose the diseased body to it, it overwhelmed the viruses, it killed them, and then the natural processes of the body would get rid of those dead, toxic little microbes. And in the actual human trial, which is what I named my book after, the human trial.
Right.
It was a very small trial. I will say that right up front. And it is in my book as well. It's like 16 people with various forms of diseases, including visible cancers and so on. They were all, don't use this word in the medical world, cured.
Cured, right.
Don't use that word.
No.
It was the damnedest case of spontaneous remission. All 16 of them ever.
Couldn't believe. So hence enters Randall Archer. He's our protagonist in your book. And what interests me about Randall was his time at Harvard, because since I studied my graduate work there, I wasn't 16 when I went there. But I wondered, he came from, he was, I think he was in high school, and he was a child from a steel mill workers family in Pennsylvania. How does a child like that manage to get a full ride at Harvard?
Well,
and it was during the Depression as well that you were writing this about. Yes.
Yeah. Well, he entered college in the 1920s, so a little bit before the Depression began, but he did it purely by being absolutely brilliant.
He was.
So yeah. So he was a guy that could just see, conceptually remember everything, figure out how to apply it. But he was, he's not a perfect human being, as none of us are. The flip side of all that brilliance is it really aggravated his brothers and his father, who were all working.
Oh, right. They didn't want him to go. Right. They wanted him to stay there.
Yeah. And join them at the mill. And he didn't want to do that. Plus, they were all big, brawny guys. And he was littler.
Yeah, he was a little meek. Yeah.
Yeah. But he had a teacher, actually a counselor at his high school, who knew how brilliant he really was, what a standout he was. And she had the connection at Harvard.
Right.
And when he graduated early from high school at the age of 16, she's the one that behind the scenes introduced him to the right people. And because he was so brilliant, they just kept keeping him at Harvard for pre-med, med, and then he did a specialization in pathology, which feeds into this story very nicely.
And his mentor was, followed him all the way through to their discovery. But he did meet the physics professor, Adam Wakefield. And Adam was the one who had the magical microscope.
That is correct. And Adam, I'm sorry, this is going to be a spam call. Can never control those. Adam was working on his PhD, or no, he was doing post-grad work.
Right.
In the medical lab at Harvard, because he was testing his microscope development with the specimen slides that Randall Archer was making as part of his working in the lab. So the two met there, and I like the contrast in characters. So Adam Wakefield is a Bostonian Brahmin himself. He's very prep schooly and dignified and tall and blah, blah, blah. And Randall Archer is the exact opposite. He's small, He's wily.
He has one jacket, I think, not warm enough for being in Harvard, being in Cambridge, in the middle of the winter.
Wearing all the clothing.
I had to laugh. Yeah, I had to laugh about that. That was funny.
Yeah, I have a friend who went to school back east, not Harvard, but nearby. And he said, boy, that reminded me of me. He was a smart guy and he got a scholarship to go to college. And he said, that's what I did. I put on every single piece of clothing I had during the winter. That was my winter clothing.
But the amazing thing is, here's this kid who is wearing layers of clothing and ends up meeting his love interest, who's a Boston Brahmin. I mean, how the world? I guess it was Adam that introduced them somehow.
Yeah.
But I kept thinking, is this really going to work, this marriage? But every chapter I read, they were still together. How did he meet her anyway? I know that there was an introduction at one point, but then she came back somehow into his life.
Yeah. So that they met. One of my teachers used to call it the meet cute. So They met on Harvard's campus during a blizzard. Well, it wasn't exactly a blizzard, but it was cold and it was windy. And all the Boston Brahmins had their beautiful cashmeres and furs and everything. And here's Archer in his layers, just trying to get across campus to someplace warm. And Adam Wakefield, his collaborator, his future collaborator and long-term collaborator, stops him, sees him and stops him, and he is with the love interest, which is Elizabeth.
This is Elizabeth, yeah.
That's how they first meet. But the way they connected was Elizabeth was hospitalized for an appendectomy, and Archer was on that particular rotation in his medical career. So he had met her, and she was everything he could never have, and he was just drawn to her like a fly. And as they began to know each other a little bit at the hospital, she was fascinated. She who had every door open for her.
Right.
And so little was expected of her, which is the other side of the coin. Here was this kid that pulled himself up at 16 and had never looked back. And so he fascinated her for those reasons, and she fascinated him for the obvious reasons. She was the unreachable.
Right.
And so they got together, maybe not for the best of reasons for a long-term marriage, but that's how they got together. It explains a lot of the way people are drawn to each other anyway, in real life.
Right, exactly. And she was going to prove to her parents that she could do this without using them to get there.
She really wanted to test herself. She wanted to know, who am I besides the man whose shoulders I sit upon? Who am I? What can I do in the world? And she was very much ahead of her time, because again, this is the 20s going into the 30s. She was really more ornamental women of that social level. They didn't work. They weren't supposed to work. Working was beneath them.
Right.
So on and so forth. So yeah, she was a disturber, and her family really disapproved of her personal desires to find out who she is, as well as her choice of husband.
Exactly. Now, we don't want to give away too much here, but there was a lot of interest in this study that these two guys were doing. And, the academic world all wanted a part of this in some way. So there were instances where, they were shut out and let's not give it away. But it was, you wanted to scream at one point. How dare you? They've done this. How dare you, put them aside? Mm-hmm. But at any rate, the book it's fascinating. And for those of you listening and watching who want to read more about it, or maybe even win your own copy of it, if you want to go to Facebook and log on to author to novels and latte on Facebook, you might even win your own copy of the book. But let me. So I understand that this book was not your first book. Can you tell me a little bit about The Sausage Maker's Daughter?
The Sausage Maker's Daughters was a greatly edited and drafted version of my master's thesis.
Ah.
I had to write a book to graduate from USC with a writing degree. And so it just came to me. I was always interested in the 60s, especially from a radical point of view, because I was not a radical and I was a little younger than most of the people at the time that were protesting everything. And so I wanted to explore the 60s again. And it so happens my home state of Wisconsin was, especially the University of Wisconsin in Madison, was one of the most radical campuses in the country at the time.
Wow.
In fact, Tom Hayden, who was the head of the SDS, called Wisconsin the Berkeley of the Midwest. So there was a lot of stuff going on, including the very first death that occurred due to anti-war protests.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody blew up the wrong building and a graduate student died.
Oh my God.
And so that was all kind of happening in the background of my life, and I really wanted to look at it in a more adult way. And then I also come from a big family. So I have 4 sisters and no brothers, so sort of like living in a dorm.
Yeah.
I wanted to explore sibling rivalry because there was always plenty of that in my life too. So those two are the sort of overarching themes.
I see. The Sausage Maker's Daughter.
But it is a legal thriller. It's a legal thriller.
Yeah. All right. When you write, I think we've talked about this before, but whether you are a pantster or a plotter, people who plot every scene and know exactly where they're going, or people who just sit down and write by the seat of their pants and don't really know where they're going and let the story take itself. You, of course, with the Human Trial, you knew where that was going. You had that, but I don't know whether there were scenes with your characters that went a different way than you had plotted, or how would you categorize yourself?
Well, I would say that I am sort of a half and half plotter, because I certainly in this first, the Human Trial is the first in a trilogy, which I'm planning to bring from the 30s into the 70s into the COVID era, so the modern era. And because the science and the suppression of the science still applies. So I wanted to keep showing that in a dramatic way. But I knew where this particular story was going to end because of the real scientists and what had happened to them in real life. And they are completely fiction, but their story is the underlying inspiration of both characters and the arc of the plot of the story. So I knew where it was going. And then I think as your characters continue to develop in your mind and in your work and in your writing, I think somehow things happen that surprise you as an author. Their personalities take over and you're living in their heads and you realize they wouldn't do this, they would do that. Maybe it takes a turn that you weren't expecting.
Right.
So there's an element of both. An overall plot, probably a good idea when I start where it's going to go. Doesn't necessarily mean it will go there. And then individual characters acting on paper, so to speak, they can take it in different ways that are fun and exciting. It's exciting for me. It's interesting for me.
Yeah.
because I don't know every detail of everything that's going to
Right.
happen.
So it is a little of both. It is a little plotter and a little pantster. That's true. Do you have a favorite time of day that you prefer to write?
Yeah, I've gotten in the habit since I used to work in the corporate world way back when. And I was always, on the road at 6:30 in the morning and so on and so forth. I've really gotten in the habit since I quit doing that and started going to writing school and then writing is I like to I end up working in the afternoons and so my day looks like I get up, I usually do some kind of exercise. I do all of the, menial stuff we all have to do, answer emails,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And then I sit down to write, around lunchtime or a little after, and sometimes I don't finish until well into dinner time.
Right.
Sometimes some days are slower than others in terms of, some days are just a little harder to write, so it may end a little earlier, may end at 7:30, it may end at 5:30, but I do write in the afternoons.
Yeah, that's my favorite time to write. It's in the afternoon. I don't know why. I just find that the most relaxing time, and I can concentrate more at that point. I don't know what it is. I have friends who get up at 4 and 5 in the morning, and that's their time, and I just could never do that. Not my thing. Not my thing.
No.
No. So how can people follow you online? Do you have a website or how do they get in touch with you?
It's interesting that you say that, because this previous week was one of the worst technology weeks of my life. My website disappeared. My author account at Amazon disappeared. Oh my gosh. Anyway, who knows? Who knows what's happening in the stars? But yes, I have a website, and I'm on, I always have to open up my email so I don't miss anything. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. It's all Audrey Gale author. I'm on TikTok. Let me get to one of my emails so I can just see me. Let's see. That's no good. I'm sorry. I should have this in my brain.
We'll get it and we'll put it on the screen when this is going, when we air this. So this will be fine. We'll get your information.
Okay, so my website is Audrey Gale, Gale, Audrey Audrey, Audrey Gale author. Oh, I wish I could just. I'm sorry. I should.
That's okay.
AudreyGaleAuthor.com. You can find me on my website. It has all of my social media, so it's TikTok.
It's on there. Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah,
that's great.
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
All of them. Yeah, all of them. Someone's trying to get you really bad. Well, listen, I really appreciate us finally getting together. And with all those fires out there, I know we had a lot of trouble. You were evacuated and then you're finally back. And I'm so happy that nothing was destroyed. But at any rate, I appreciate you fitting me in. And I wish you luck continuing with this series. I'm anxious to follow them. And I look forward to talking to you after you get your next publication.
Thank you, Carole. And thank you for reaching out and being persistent. It's been a difficult time, and this is the first podcast I've done in months. So I told you at the beginning I was feeling kind of rusty, but you've made it easy for me. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.